Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's workshop on how to plan research. We are glad to have you here. This is our third webinar hosted by 𝗪𝗪𝗿. So what we are doing is we are inviting industry leaders to add value to the community. Today, I'm excited to introduce our workshop leader, Lynne Thomson. Backstory, 6 months ago, Lynne found 𝗪𝗪𝗿 through Bing Copilot while searching for AI-assisted follow-up questions for open ends. We have been in touch since then. We have been exchanging emails, and I found Lynne's work really interesting, what she's doing with decodingAI.net. Lynne is a customer and user researcher. She has helped companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Gates Foundation, GE Healthcare, to name a few. Lynne now consults on AI in research, helping businesses through decodingAI.net. Today, she is here with us to teach us specifically on how to plan research, getting started with it, and making it a success. Lynne, thank you so much for taking time to join us today. The stage is yours.
Great. Thanks very much, Wilson. Thanks, everyone. Happy to be here. So to say I've been doing this a long time, scary to count, both internally, Microsoft, Amazon, and as an external research supplier, TNS, and some others. Background communication studies, really survey research methods, and an MBA. So combining all that. But what I sort of wanted to share with you all is lessons hard won, how to plan your research so that it lands impactfully, so that you make a difference, right? So we're going to go across three big things. The first one is the right business question. And that's usually not going to be the question that your boss or stakeholder or whatever comes to you with to research. There's some negotiation involved in getting to something that research can answer and that's important enough to warrant answering. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about a little bit about techniques, not going to go deep on techniques, but about picking techniques, ways to think about that, and then talk to the right people, right? It's all down to talking to the right people. And in this world of bots and liars and what have you, that is getting more and more challenging, but there are things to do about that. So just to think about the opposite, what is it when your research doesn't land with impact? Here's three things that you can hear. Now, nice work. Anybody want lunch? That means it's not actionable. There's nothing for someone to do coming out of the research. So it's nice, but not credible. That usually takes the form of mutter, walking out. Basically, I don't believe you, right? So you did not convince me that what you did was valid and worthwhile. So we're going to think about how to avoid that. And not relevant. How much did this cost? Why did we do this? Those are three things you do not want to hear after your research presentation. So let's think about how to avoid those. First thing is the right business question, right? It's worth spending time and money to answer. It's specific enough to be answerable, right? And you can use it to generate hypotheses to test. So let's take an example. You're usually going to need to negotiate your way to the business question, right? So if your stakeholder asks, how can we grow our business? It's very vague, right? How can we grow our business? Basic marketing says you can attract new users, you can take competitive users, you can get current users to use more, you can get current users to pay more. Those are all the different ways you can grow the business. You can usually negotiate to figure out what they're really thinking of. In this case, is it we want to attract competitive users, right? Or we need to grow beyond early adopters. That's very common if you've got really new technology, right? How do we get to that mainstream audience beyond early adopters? Or will current users pay more for a new feature, right? That's a different approach. Can we do something to be able to raise price? So those are all sort of specific business questions that would come out of how can we grow our business? If the person coming to you is coming from product, then they'll usually say, what do customers need? That can be, what are our current customer needs? How are the needs different for potential customers? What do we need to change to win non-users? So it's going a bit further than simply profile the needs of customers because that gets very vague and you wind up in that was interesting. You want to get lunch? So we want to get more specific so we'll understand how we're going to use it. Somebody might ask you, how satisfied are our users? You want to get that to how satisfied are which users? And is there differences in that, right? Just a satisfaction score, not very interesting. Differences in satisfaction, trends in satisfaction can be important. Drivers of satisfaction can be important, but satisfaction in and of itself as a number is, sorry, Fred Reichhold, not all that interesting, right? You need to know why. So let's assume, for the purpose of this, that we've negotiated to a business question of how can we attract competitive users, right? So that's a good business question. We want to attract competitive users to our product. At this point, literally go around the business and find out what are the hypotheses that people in the business have, right? Because I have often been surprised at how divergent are the ideas people have about what to do with this. And we don't need to say we're looking for hypotheses. We're all scientific. You just say, I want to understand what you think the answer to this question might be. How do you think we could attract competitive users to our product? And if you go to product says, oh, we have to have XYZ new feature to attract competitive users. Obviously, that's it, right? Okay. Marketing says competitive users aren't aware of our points of superiority. We need a bigger marketing budget. We need advertising, right? We have to get the message out there. People don't even know. Sales says we're not at the right trade shows or social media platforms. We have to have more budget to be able to do sales better. Customer service says that's really nice, but we get the calls and we know that new users can't navigate the UI, so they can't even get started. What I wanted just to show this is you can have a surprising diversity of opinions, right? So you want to gather those and literally make them into hypotheses about what's going on. Because once you have a clear hypothesis, you can then test it, right? And you can find out what's supported and what's not supported. You also have a dead easy way to organize a presentation, which is get people to commit to which they think is the most important. And then over the course of your presentation, you'll reveal what actually is important and which ones you were able to refute. It works great. It's easy as pie, but always works. One thing that will come up as you go around to stakeholders, you'll ask them what their ideas are. And somebody is going to say, I don't want to tell you my idea, what I think it is. I don't want to bias the research by telling you what I think the answer is. And that's when you do want to go get all social sciencey and say, look, I need hypothesis. You're providing hypothesis. I will make sure that the research is unbiased, but we need hypotheses to test. If you get that, it's easy to push back, but you want to get that list of hypotheses, and that will drive everything you're going to do. So let's think about techniques. Once you've got the hypothesis, what's the right technique? Okay. And I want to urge you to think multimodal, right? There is rarely one perfect approach to a question. Rather, you want to use multiple approaches and then to get to the triangulation on what really is the answer. I also want you to be thinking really overtly at this stage is how am I going to win over my most skeptical audiences? Those are usually engineering, sometimes finance. But if you're in an organization that isn't used to doing consumer research or customer research, you're going to find some skepticism, and you want to think hard about what will those particular people take as useful evidence. So if we think about triangulating on the answer, qualitative is usually one of the first things we can do. Oftentimes it's just conversations, right? You're looking to observe an open-ended conversations with individuals and small groups, right? You want to look and listen for the context, the vocabulary, right? Site visits, in-home interviews are the best. You will learn more than what you ask and what they answer, right? But you'll actually see how something happens, right? Video is magic. If you're in that situation, particularly in the customer's own environment, any video you take turns into great presentations. Amazon is incredibly cheap in everything they do internally. They will spend money to get video of customers because they know that is what will win over executives, skeptical audiences. And in business to business, really important to get quotes from identifiable customers. That buys you credibility. You don't want to say, someone said blah. Bob Smith of XYZ big customer company said this. Mary said that, right? Anytime you can make it from identifiable customers, that really buys you a lot of credibility. Let's talk about surveys and experiments. This is where we really test the hypotheses, right? We want to understand who thinks one way, who thinks another way. We can measure trade-offs. Now that's where you start getting into the approaches that really work for building a product roadmap. So you're talking your max diffs, your conjoints, discrete choice things. So any of those things, this is the way to measure a trade-off, right? Everything is always important, right? Don't ask how important is a whole list of things. They're all important, right? You want to measure the trade-offs. What does someone like more? What do they need more? You can also profile multiple brands. There's various techniques for that. Correspondence mapping, things like that. Perceptual mapping are very good. But the survey is really where you test the hypotheses. And I would just, the AI follow-up on open-ends is a very exciting thing. As Wilson said, that's what originally led me to Block Survey. I would call it qual-esque because there's already a lot of context set before you get that. But you are listening for how people speak about things. And I also say that AI auto-coding of open ends is a huge time saver. Just unbelievable improvement on how we used to do things. Love that, thinking it's going to get even better as there's more power in the hands of the user, of the analyst. So that's the survey world. That's where you're going to test your hypotheses. Let's also talk about big data, right? This is the third leg of that stool. It answers the question, how many, what percent of the whole, what if we were to make this change, what kind of effect would that have on our business? Big data can be your own internal databases, right? Sometimes it's things like the census, right? How many people are there in this situation? Bureau of Labor Statistics has how many people are employed both in this occupation and in this industry in the US, right? So if you're saying we're selling to law firms, well, how many law firms are there? How many people are there, right? How many lawyers work inside corporations versus how many work in independent firms? Those are the kind of questions that you can get those kind of statistics. You can then say how big this opportunity is. So if I say to you, look, the opportunity is in small law firms, right? More so than corporate counsel. How many of them are there? That's the piece that turns it into, well, what's the opportunity here? This is what gets the finance guys going, oh, we could do this. This could be big, right? So you want to do that. Usually it's pretty easy, just knowing where to look. But for the US, at least the federal government has a lot of good stuff, if it's still in existence next week. Census, Bureau of Labor Statistics, tremendous sources of data. And I will say, I've even used LinkedIn to try to figure out how big a universe is. A couple of years ago, I was working on a profile of people who do machine learning. So the question is, how many people do machine learning? And the only way we could find to answer it was to go into LinkedIn and see how many people included the word machine learning in their profile. Not that's everybody who does machine learning, but we figured it was a good big chunk of it. And I will tell you that putting together the findings we had versus the universe, it's the only time I know work of mine actually got to Satya, right? Because for the first time somebody was able to say, how many people are there that do this? How fast is it growing? And what is the profile of them? Because by the way, the profile of people who do machine learning outside of Microsoft is pretty different from the profile inside. And that's a lesson we had to keep teaching over and over again. But highly recommend you find whatever else you're doing, find some way to link it back to something about the universe. So let's talk about asking the right people, right? This is usually the hardest part of research, the technically difficult part, right? And bots are making it even harder, okay? The main thing to keep in mind, forget sample size. It's much more important to talk to a few of the right people than a lot of the wrong people or a mix of the right and wrong people. You want to make sure you exclude the wrong people, even if that leaves you with only a few of the right people, right? Because the wrong people will give you the wrong information, and a mix of right and wrong will give you unclear, right? So let's talk a little bit about how do we get to the right people. If you have a database where you know who's using your product and you can reach them directly, good for you, lucky, that is the best. Then you know who you're talking to. When you pull at sample that you want to do an interview with, say, or a survey, when you pull it, remember to get data on the facts about them, the relevant facts about them. How frequently have they bought? How recently have they bought? How much do they buy? Well, how much profitability do they represent? All those things that you're going to want on the back end to be able to cut your sample up into the relevant pieces. So don't just go get names or emails, whatever. Make sure that you get the information and you can link back. Now that can create GDPR and other kind of private problems you're going to have to deal with, but you want to have that information so that you know who you're talking to. At a minimum, you want to say, okay, my resulting sample is 70% light users. My database actually is only 30% light users, or vice versa, usually, right? You want to know how something matches back to the whole truth, and then you may well weight your data to be more reflective of that. If you have that database, you are way ahead of the pack because you can know for sure that people are the right people. And I would just add, remember that reviews and comments are not random samples. So if you've got a database of people who have left reviews, if you've got access to some kind of people who have made comments, that's great, but always treat that with a grain of salt because people don't leave reviews and comments randomly. They usually leave it either when they've had a very good experience or a very bad experience. So you want to calibrate. If you have access to those names and those people, great, but be aware that there may well not be representative of the whole. Now, if you don't have a database, then you are looking at external sample, and you can buy sample from third-party sources. But you have to be really careful. And this is where I've seen a lot of egregious overclaiming in some of the newer tools. That sure, the sample's out there, you can buy it and you can screen against it. But if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to wind up with human liars and bots. So there are techniques to use to keep the liars and the bots out, right? Think of them as honesty techniques, right? You could do validation. If it's a B2B thing, can you find this person in LinkedIn? Can you find them on social media? Can you verify that they really are a real person, right? Something that has been done a lot is have an open-ended question, and then you read those looking for nonsense answers. In the past, bots and liars and things would give you nonsense answers, but with Gen AI, their answers are getting better because often they'll go out to the brand's website. Let's say you're asking a question about what do you like about XYZ brand? They'll go out and they'll actually pull the benefits off the website. So they're getting more sophisticated because these are commercial samples. They get paid for doing this. Can be pennies, can be a lot more than pennies. So it's tougher all the time. There is something that's developed by a friend, and it was one of those head slap moments. Mitch Egger's honesty detector. I think it's actually patented. You can find it online. What he did is he said, okay, I want to find the pattern of people who will lie to get into a survey. And generally, to get into a survey, you need to say yes, that you do something that there is of interest. So he said, okay, just give me six low incidence, non-correlated things. So the classic ones. Did you go to the opera last month? Do you have more than 3 dogs? Various things like that. Ask those and then compute for each respondent a score. How many times did they say yes? So you could have 0 of 6 all the way up to 6 of 6. And what he showed, he then asked a different question, a question where he knew the percentage that should be in the universe. So for instance, are you left-handed? Are you Leo? Are you the year of the rooster? Whatever is relevant for your audience. Ask a question where you know about what the average should be, what the sum total, percent total. Then run that against that 0 of 6, 1 of 6, 2 of 6, 3 of 6. What is at the low, the 0, 1, 2, the percentage of being left-handed or Leo or whatever will be about correct. But as you get into the 4 of 6s, 5 of 6, 6 of 6s, the percentage who are also saying they are left-handed or Leo, what have you, goes up. It's like a little hockey stick at the end. Drop those people. Maybe somebody really did go to the opera, have 3 dogs, whatever, but best to drop them. Most likely they are lying. And you'll see as you do this sort of research on research, all kinds of other things in your data start to work out. Because if you ask people what brand they buy, they will always go to the one that's best known in the category. You start dropping out the liars, your market shares will turn correct. So it's a way of doing it. It's very good. And I like to make the questions relevant to the category. So I ask 6 things that you might do related to machine learning or whatever researching. So actually getting useful data, but I'm also looking across it to find those people who are just doing too many things. And we want to take them out. This whole thing about how you validate the sample, if you're in an organization of a mature market research organization, this is appendix material in your report, right? It's just something that hygienics needs to be done in the back, nobody cares. If you're in an organization that is not mature for research, not used to using research, then this stuff becomes profoundly important. How you found the people. I would say best practices for presentations is always start with a big idea and then only use the detail to support the conclusion. If you are presenting to an engineering team who is not used to using research, just start with the most basic detail. We pulled the name of 300 people out of our customer database. We then contacted them in this way. 75 of them answered our survey, blah, blah, blah. You want to be absolutely clear. We talked to the right people. You have to get over that hump, right? A lot of engineers, deductive reasoning, right? They go from the particular, they will not be interested in the whole picture you're presenting until they know the particular parts. So this is where you really want to go through this if you've got that kind of an audience. And it's never taught this way in presentation skills, but this is learned this the hard way too many times. So that's really it. Those the 3 most important things you're going to do to plan for impact. Okay? Questions, thoughts? Happy to chat.
This is 𝗪𝗵𝘁 from Protocol Theory. Just out of curiosity, one thing that you mentioned in your presentation was talking about searching the right panel providers for your survey. I don't know if you've seen the news about 𝗪𝗵𝘁 recently, but they were indicted by the government for a big wire fraud operation, which is obviously going to make people question some of the data that they've purchased in the past. What are some of the things that you look for, or what kind of advice would you give researchers that don't have a good relationship with a panel provider, that you would say, hey, look, these are the questions you should ask, or this is what you should be looking for when you're looking for somebody like that?
If somebody tries to sell you sample for $7 a piece and they say they're going to reach business owners, run, do not walk, because it's just unrealistic. Like I said, I've used plenty of panel, and that method I talked about, which Mitch developed, is a thing of beauty. And if you're going to do tech research in China, you're going to throw out 30% at least, because people will exaggerate all the things they own and all the things they've done. So you have to be your own, buy more completes than you need and throw people out in the back end. but also be realistic that you're not going to get $7, $8 is what you pay for consumer sample, and you cannot just screen to reach executives, doctors, anything like that. But the whole issue with online sample is bad and going to get worse as the bots get more capable. So more and more, if you've got access to your own people, your own names, do it. Other thoughts?
Just to follow up on that, Lynn and Mark, I'm just curious. I see researchers using AI to also build synthetic audience, right? I think they are experimenting with it. I think for these initial hypotheses, just to see how my experiment is going to be. And they are using synthetic audiences, using all the AI agents today just to simulate it. Is that a thing? How accurate is it? Does that help researchers to visualize how their entire project is going to be, the research is going to be? Just curious.
In my mind, I'm very skeptical of synthetic data, and there's two flavors of synthetic data. One is to essentially crawl. So there's systems that will go out and search social media, and so will bring you back a segmentation of people by some attitude, right? And they're okay, particularly if it's something that people talk about online a lot, like something like political things or public things. It's okay, though you can't really dig in very far. They make up quotes for you, but LLMs really love this other sideism. So they'll have a quote about that's the whole reason for that grouping, and then it'll turn around and also contradict itself as the way LLMs want to do. So that's the qual form of synthetic data. And I've seen it thus far. I'm not impressed. Synthetic quantitative data, I haven't gotten as close to it. I think it's interesting if what you really want to do is just test your questionnaire. I wouldn't use the data for anything. And I have heard that people who have been playing around with it more, that the kind of correlations that you are seeking to find in real data, right, often aren't there in the synthetic data, right? Because nobody knows that the synthetic, like that correlation is there. That's what you're doing the research to find. Net, I'm skeptical, but it's obviously an area that people are interested in.
Thank you,
If
Lynn.
anybody's had an experience one way or another, I'd love to hear about it.
Hey, Mark, again, I think that you're right on about 90% of what you said there, Lynn. I definitely wouldn't use it for any kind of new concept testing, because with synthetic data, it's just like any kind of other AI source. You have to have historical data to train the model, if you will. And so any kind of new concept or new product testing that you're going to do, I think synthetic data is just a disaster to use. Personally, at this stage of the game, I wouldn't use synthetic data myself either. The only thing I can see down the road possibly using synthetic data on would be like a brand tracker or something that is repetitive and normalized, if you will. But again, I think that's a case by case basis now and even down the road. But yeah, I would agree with you on the
Because
majority of that.
it's like you do a brand tracker because you're looking for change, but the synthetic data won't change. So like, why bother? But clearly there are smart people who are working on it, and so I don't want to say never, but it's an interesting area.
Got it. Thank you, Lynn. Another question, I think this is on big data, correct? You touched upon big data could be a source for primarily finding truth if there are already data out there. Does it still hold true today? I know a few of the businesses and also market researchers are saying, okay, they are relying more on secondary market data out there. 80% of the data is out there. Now with agents helping them to build their own crawlers, right? Like you said, how can I find about a brand more? Deeper insights into a certain brand, what is working for them, what is not working for them, even going through all their testimonials, reviews, that gives some rich insights. I see bots are able to crawl and do this. Are these secondary data good to add to the primary research what we do? What is the weight it should be? Just curious.
Yeah. And I wouldn't think of secondary research as being big data in the same way. Maybe it's actually its own. It's really just looking at research that other people have done, analysis that other people have done. And that's absolutely fair. And that is a great use of bots and crawlers and things, is to go find what's out there, because there's a lot out there, right? So go find out what everybody else has done before you do it. Maybe you find out that the answer is known and you don't need to do this research, or they've answered sort of the basic question, but that generates a secondary hypothesis, more interesting, more actionable. Great, we can go do that. So, that way I'm all for it. I think of true secondary data as quantitative. Again, the Census Bureau says that there should be X% of people 18 to 24. So does my sample match that? Or if 75% of this group likes it, okay, how big is that group? What is the opportunity in that? That's the kind of thing. How many people, say in LinkedIn, they do machine learning? Okay, you count that, you can track that over time. It's gone up quite a bit. So those are the kind of things you want to get. That's a little different than secondary research, so it's very important because there's a lot out there.
Thank you.
So you do want to be careful. It's a bunch of lawyers have figured out. You can't just go ask ChatGPT to write you a brief, because it will come back with stuff that might not exist.
Yeah, I understand. I think you were talking about right people, right? Building people who are committed to participate in research. So as an organization, how do you see one can build an audience who are willing to participate in, say, interviews or surveys? Just wanted to know, how can one get started?
At Amazon, I ran a huge survey research program for Alexa, and we had pretty good response rates. We were able to reach out to buyers. We knew who had bought. That's the beauty of being direct merchant. We knew who had bought. We reached out to them, and we got people to participate, to answer our questions, keep the questions short. And early adopters are quite likely to answer your questions. So in that sense, we weren't building a database of people who had responded in the past or said they would do it, but rather we were just going out to people, because we were oftentimes looking for somebody who's done something particular with the system and wanted to find out about that. You can certainly do that. It's best to be reaching out more or less randomly. If you start getting people into, let's say you have a user panel, lots of organizations have that, which is, at least at Microsoft, is derisively known as the petting zoo. Right? People agree to be interviewed, oftentimes in exchange for access to executives and what have you. It gets to be a little bit of an echo chamber. They'll tell you what you've told them before. They're deep into your ecosystem. You'll never find out that you've got huge usability issues for people who aren't deep in your ecosystem, because they aren't in the petting zoo. So it can be useful. You can get fast feedback, but do view it as a non-representative sample. Question, your approach for identifying the right business question. It generally is a negotiation with stakeholders of some combination of if we had an answer to this, it would be actionable, right? If we knew that, we could do this, right? And that's really what you want. If it's such a vague, what do people want? Free and no calorie, you ask them, right? So it's just about figuring out for the problem what works. The other thing that I really like to do is be a fly on the wall at executive meetings. What are people arguing about? What are they disagreeing about? And oftentimes you'll realize that at its crux, there is a question that someone believes the world, is this way. Somebody believes it's a different way. And that leads them to their different points of view, right? They won't talk about it in terms of that this is the crux of the thing. They're rather, we have to get more money into the call center because we have to improve our blah, blah, blah. We have to have more in the product because of this. You'll find that at heart, there's a testable question in there, right? It could be that usability is our problem. We're getting sampling, but they can't onboard to the product because they can't figure it out. And in particular, it's the competitive users who can't figure it out. So we can use research to get to that. But if I could hear, one time I was asked, what's my superpower? I said, I can listen to people having a disagreement and find the testable hypothesis that is behind that disagreement. And that's a good way to think about it. But I've seen lots of, particularly people who aren't experienced in research, run after the wrong question, right? Question that won't yield action, won't yield usable insight. Anything else? Clear as mud?
I just want to touch upon the Eggers honesty detector, right? So are these series of questions, you get started with a question, you answer it, and then you recheck on your answers again by asking maybe a negative question. Is that how honesty detection works on a...
So the usual way to do it is you're going to use it after the fact in the survey to drop potential respondents, right? Now, we've also actually used it real time, and you can be using it real time, and they get dropped out. But you just 6 questions where you can answer yes or no. Count up the yeses, and it is the yes, not the no, because that's how traditionally all the screeners for survey research work. So they're looking for yeses to get into the survey. So 6 yeses, count up how many they got. And then if you're really doing it right, have a question like, are you left-handed, what have you? And you can just watch that go kick up at the end, right? And those are the people you want to take out.
Got it. Okay.
Not to say that all of them are liars. Some of them might not be, but better to drop them. And the more you're really having to comb through lots of people to find the right people, the more important it is. Because he showed if you legitimately have a 5% incidence category, you own some particular car or something like that, and you've got 5% liars, then your resulting sample is half and half liars. And liars at best will answer randomly. So at best it's noise, but at worst, they're going to parrot things they've heard and actually could completely upend your results. And this is just going to get harder. I think it will push more and more people towards having their own user bases and be able to go around the sample.
Which means we can have a score for every user who's going to participate historically, and then you maintain and see who are the right ones to pick for the next research.
We don't usually go back to people. I'm assuming you have enough people that you can have fresh sample every time.
Okay.
Going back to people gets tricky. Funny story, I wound up taking over beta work for 𝗪𝗓 because a very good qualitative researcher had gotten tasked with running a survey, customer user satisfaction for beta, to say, is this product ready for launch? That it'll get their notion was they wanted to get 4 out of 5 stars minimum for a new product. So was this ready for launch that it would get 4 out of 5 stars? And the mean rating in the beta panel was going up. They did this, surveyed the same people month after month. The rating was going up. They released the product. Dismal, absolutely dismal, got just hammered in the reviews. And I went back and reanalyzed his data. And what he hadn't noticed was the people who didn't like it were dropping out faster than the people who did like it. So the average score was going up. Nobody was changing their ratings, but the average score was going up. So you want to, if you're going to go back to the same people, you have to be very careful that you're controlling for that kind of thing, because the happy people are much more likely to stay in than the unhappy people, hence the petting zoo.
Got it. That's an interesting one. Yeah. So which means you build your audience time to time and then have fresh samples to test your hypothesis. Yeah.
We refer to it from there on out as fresh eyes. So
Fresh
we
eyes,
try to
okay.
get right before you're going to go launch, get new people in that beta panel, which is hard to do because usually they want them as big as they can be. But you needed fresh eyes to get a valid read. And with fresh eyes, we could nail the in-market satisfaction On a 5-point scale, we were within 0.2 for 25 of 27 launches. We could absolutely nail it if we had fresh eyes.
Got it. Thanks, Lynn. We got a question from Melissa in chat.
Mhm.
In addition to honesty detectors, have you considered using AI for screening qualification questions to look for nonsensical answers as you are building a qualitative study?
Yeah, I think that is a good use of Gen AI, is going through and reading them. And it takes a little bit of training, a little bit of fine tuning to get a model to say what's nonsense, but it's very doable. And that should be being done already. What's trickier is people are telling me they're now finding that the bots are going out and pulling information off of websites. And so their answers are not nonsensical.
Okay.
They're not true. But they're going out and pulling stuff off of the brand's website and putting that in, and they're writing it. A bot can write perfectly fine. So it's not, used to be you'd get, people would just do something on a keyboard, right? And it looks fine, just happens to be written by a bot. Some techniques to re-engage unsatisfied people. You can force people, but tough.
But I think, is it being the case, I've seen with reviews specifically, even for survey participation, either where they're really happy, they give you the data, they participate and tell you that you're doing good. If not, if they're really not happy with the service or product, and then they leave a bad review. So that's from sheer observation from what we see in reviews publicly. People who are in between, they don't take time to do it. It's because they're neither satisfied nor.
Right.
Yeah. So how do we find them and find maybe probably people who are not satisfied? Sometimes they're closed and they don't tell us they don't like us. Probably it's their personality. This is,
Well, somebody that takes the time to write a review, it's not just that they didn't like it, but I think they're basically calling out a problem. So I think that's a great opportunity to go back to that person. It's at that point, it's not research, it's customer service. And you're smart to go back to that person. Now, I've seen places where they're basically like going to beat you up to get you to change your review. That's not good. But finding out what happened with that person and trying to make it better, it can be well worthwhile, if that's what's going on. But that's a form of marketing. That's not research at that point.
so
I
in
will
that
tell you,
perspective, should extroverts, maybe the personality archetypes, have to be considered for the fresh eyes or the audience we put together for research?
yeah, I think you usually don't have that luxury. You're just trying to get to fresh people who can give you a fresh perspective on things. But the world is made up of a mix. Now, I will tell you one thing, that when you move from early adopters to a more mainstream audience, customer satisfaction will go down because early adopters will rate you more highly, even though the product is objectively better. We saw this a lot with Alexa. Early users, early product, problematic, ratings very high.
Okay.
But later product, absolutely demonstrably better product, ratings not as high, because they don't care as much, right? You don't give it a 5 or a 7, whatever it is, when, oh, it's okay, right? Those early adopters were all over it, loved it.
Is it because the expectation is really high after the first version? They're more forgiving with the initial version, but they're not forgiving.
Early adopters are very forgiving, ridiculously forgiving. And that is something really important to remember, because if you're trying to go from early adopters to mainstream, all kinds of things about your product that are totally acceptable to the early adopters will not be acceptable to the mainstream, right? So you've got to clean slate, figure out how the mainstream is going to use your product and what problems they're going to experience. And they're going to bring up things that never were not an issue for the early adopters, right? But they're not going to put as much work into it. That's where you want to really do qual, is get some mainstream people, give them the product, ask if you can watch them unbox it, watch them get it set up. They will be very different from your early adopters and different from your internal people who are more similar to the early adopters. That's really crossing the chasm. That's why it's called that, right? It's things go in flight and a lot of things fall in that chasm because it's not an experience for the mainstream. It's an okay experience for early adopters, but there are not very many of them, right? So
Yeah.
you never make a mainstream product that way.
Thanks, Lynn. We are close to the end of the session. Lynn, thank you so much for
You're welcome.
taking time to do this and sharing your expertise today, specifically your insights on how to plan research. I like the 3 pointers. I'll take it as a key takeaway, why it matters and how to get started keeping this as a framework. And it feels like a practical tool to understand and do research better in a simpler way. And we
Well, I
appreciate
hope
your time and look forward to applying what we have learned. And thank you for teaching
great.
us. And
Sure.
we are putting
Take care,
together
everybody.
a small panel within for us to research better. And these techniques will certainly help us. Thank you.
Good. Good. Take care.